Sometimes people ask me about the customizations on my horn, and there are a few which I'll explain in a minute, but here is a standard Adams. It's the custom series, but there are no options on it that are not normal on a horn. They all have the adjustable gap receiver here, so you can adjust the gap between the end of the mouthpiece and the beginning of this pipe here, which is hidden inside this area. That can make a difference to you from the player's point of view about how the horn responds. It can make a small difference to the listener's point of view because it affects tone to some extent. I've got this one about 2 turns out from all the way in, which is where I keep my own. So I'll play a song on this, and then I'll play it on my own horn, and you can hear there's a little bit of difference. The E1 is a slightly smaller bell through here. The throat is not as wide, so it has a more centered and focused sound, which some people like, and I do too, frankly. The E3 that I play has a more open area in here, gives it a larger, more fluid sound, which I also like. This song I'll use here is a traditional British song called Golden Slumbers Kiss Your Eyes. It's part of my international songbook for euphonium. That gives you a little taste of the 2 different instruments. Now, as far as the customizations on my horn, first thing you'll probably notice is the silver bell. This is actually sterling silver. It's not just plated. So the entire metal of the bell is sterling silver. The other thing is the brushed finish. The metal on the horn, except for the bright accents and the slides, are all brushed with a wire brush, basically, and then lacquered over so it doesn't have to be maintained. It's kind of an attractive finish and catches a light in some nice ways, on a stage especially. The light kind of follows the striations that are caused by the brushing. The other customization that's specific to me is I've had the lead pipe angle change a little bit to match my embouchure. The mouthpiece tends to go straight out a little bit more than most people, so I had to have the angle of the lead pipe changed to match my face a little bit more. But what I really like that I've done is to have the Amato water keys added, these little push button guys right here. They are, if you notice at the bottom of the curve, that was my specification here, and also on the 4th valve. So when you're standing and playing, so you're standing up like this, you can go touch, touch, touch here, and touch here, and all 4 will drain. I've had the pistons in the valves vented, so you don't have that seal. When you pull a valve slide out, you don't hear much of a pop, because there's a hole venting the air, so it doesn't build up in there and cause a pop, which also lets the valve free itself from water without you having to blow into it. So that's a bit smoother from the audience's point of view. They don't really like to think about you emptying spit from the horn. For the back tuning slide, the main tuning slide, I had the Amato key as well, but I had it put on the normal curve part, because very often while you're playing, you want to dump that one quickly. So I can just reach and do this without manipulating the horn this way. So I have the natural angle. The push button on this one is also on the front side. So I reach it this way, the same as I do these. The reason it's on the front side is, if it's on the back side, it's going to push against my belly and drain when I don't want it to. So that's a customization I like. I find it very handy. You can change some small things as well. I have these garnet finger button tops put on. They're just pretty. Adams has done a lot of things over the years to customize instruments for people. So you can talk to them about it, and they can probably do almost anything to accommodate what you would need in an instrument. So that's a little bit about this particular horn, and I hope you heard some differences in the sound. Now this brings up an example I've used before when you're testing instruments. This is a very small room. It's a very bright room. In that case, or in a practice room, and this isn't a lot bigger than a practice room, you'll almost always prefer the smaller instrument if you compare them in a small room. If I were to take these two horns to my church sanctuary, the differences would be a little more in favor of this horn, I think, where the bigger sound has room to develop into the room more, and the more compact focused sound of the E1 is still focused and nice in the room, but it doesn't stretch out quite as far. So it's not a difference in projection exactly. It's more a difference in how direct the sound seems to be coming from the instrument versus how much it comes from around you. But both horns are very nice. If you're not a real strong player, you'd want to stay with the E1 because it is a little bit easier to play. The E3 takes more energy, a little bit more strength because you're resonating a larger air column, especially up into here. And that takes a little bit more from you if you want to get the most out of it. And the same can be said of the sterling silver bell. First of all, it's quite expensive, so you wouldn't want to opt for that unless you were sure you're going to benefit from it. The sterling silver does offer a lot of color that you can get out of it if you work at it. It's a very dense metal. It's denser than brass, so it has some natural characteristics because of that. And I can, for example, sometimes get a much darker, deeper sound than I could on a brass instrument. But those are small things, and it costs quite a bit to do, and it's really only for advanced players. If you're just going to play the horn and enjoy it in the band setting or in the solo setting, I'm not sure you would benefit from the sterling silver, although if you like the looks, that's something to consider. It's also easier to dent, which is something to consider. It's a softer metal. There's a Model E2, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is made out of .80 brass, quite heavy. If you like a really good, deep, dark sound with tons of projection and a lot of power, that's a very good horn. It's heavier to hold, of course. I don't know why, but it seems to be just as responsive as the E3 or the E1. Doesn't quite make sense to me because it's more heavily built, but it responds really nicely all the way up and down the horn. So the E2 is another option. Also, now we have the Sonic, which is the new model from Adams. It's made exactly like that E1 that I played a minute ago, except that it doesn't have the compensating system. So that means you don't have, for example, these tubes on the back, which are part of the compensating system. That means the pistons aren't as long to accommodate that, and therefore the pistons are lighter, so you get a faster valve action by having the non-compensating horn. It's cheaper, and yet it's made just like the E1, so it has the same quality as the E1. It's fully a professional instrument. The only thing is you'll have to figure out a way to play the low notes that we rely on this system for. So for that low E flat, an octave higher, we play just that valve. In the lower octave, I add the fourth, but still just the first valve. That doesn't quite work on the Sonic. You'll either have to lip it down or use an alternate fingering for it. But in the band literature, that doesn't come up very often. So if you're a concert band player or a soloist who doesn't use that material that goes down into that compensating register, much anyway, the Sonic is a very good option, a really fine horn for quite a bit less than the E1, which is the next model up. So that's a brief overview of the Adams line. I don't have all four models here to play for you, unfortunately, or I'd be happy to do that. But given the customizations you can do to the E1, E2, and E3, there really are more than four models. There's probably something like 200 if you want to combine all the different things you could do to the instrument to make it yours. So there's some thoughts today. It's a complex process, but Adams has tried to simplify that by having what they call a selected series. Now, we talked about that with them many years ago. They were looking for something to help the dealers know what to order. Which one model if you're carrying just one, or which two models if you're carrying two, and so on. Adams has taken the reins on that one, and from the factory's point of view, they know which ones sell to the most people and provide a very easy answer for music store. They call that the selected series. So the E1, for example, would be built like the horn I just played. It'd be yellow brass, silver plated, and it wouldn't have all the customizations that this horn does, but it's a fine instrument. And so that's, if you're not into the gears and widgets and so on to make it your own, you can buy one of the selected series and simplify your life quite a lot. There's a nice selected E3 and a selected E1. I'm not sure about the E2. I'm not sure the Sonic has many options at all, so that's a very simple horn to buy. I hope this has been helpful. Like I say, it's a complex thing if you want to make an Adams instrument your own, or you can just buy one of the selected series and know you're getting a good horn right off the bat. You'll find it very well made, handmade. All of them are handmade. And they have very high standards, and they're always trying to make the horns better. There's as much as I can think of today anyway to talk about. Adams is a fun company to work for, and I'm so glad they got into brass, which was only in the mid-2000s, so 2006 or so. I think is when they built their first flugelhorn. That's how they started. So there you go. I'm associated with Adams for 12 years now, and it's been a very interesting process. They're a nice company to work with. I'm not under contract to Adams. They don't pay me a stipend every year to do things and to say nice things about the horn. I talk about whatever horn I like because I really like it. Before this, way back, I played Bessons, and at the time that was the best horn for me, and I told people so, and I told them why I thought it was the best, but there were other good horns out there. Then I switched to Sterling, which was interested now in by that time, this is before Besson had gone bankrupt and then later got moved to Germany. So they were not doing a lot to improve the breed right then, where Sterling was taking that and they were really trying to improve the breed as quickly as they could. They were working very hard to make the horn really well, and it was largely hand-assembled. So I was with Sterling for about 20 years. And again, I told people why I liked the Sterling without running down the other instruments, because there's a lot of good instruments out there. Same today with the Adams. When I first played the Adams, I thought, this has some potential. For me to like it, I mean, not for them to improve it. Just I thought this is an interesting horn. So I got one to try, and I really liked it. I found that the sound is what I want in a sound. It's what I call the British sound. It's how I think of it. Does that very nicely, but it responds better than the horns I played before. When I go through that compensating register, which is a lot of curves in the tubing, a lot of joints in the tubing as well, the response was much smoother, and I was able to play it more easily, and the fact that it was better in tune. But as I said, I played the horn, I grew to like it. I liked it better than the Sterling, and I played it for my brass group, and they also liked it better, so that was the horn for me. There's a lot of good horns behind me here on the shelves. There's Shires, and there's Besson, there's Yamaha, and some other horns that you might like better, and that's fine. We are really in a wonderful world today where euphonium players now have a choice of so many instruments that are good instruments. Some now that are going down into the cheaper ranges that they were never available before, where you couldn't buy a four-valve compensating instrument except the Bessons when I was growing up, so to speak. That was all there was. Now we have all kinds of choices, including the professional model still, but now in the mid-range and even the low range of prices. We have compensating euphoniums that are decent instruments. And among the professional horns, they're terrific, a lot of really terrific instruments. So it's a great time to be alive and to be a euphonium player. If you've not yet tried the Adams, I strongly encourage you to do that. There's a difference in the instruments that you'll feel right away. It may not be for you, or it may be for you. Whatever instruments you try, whatever euphoniums you try to compare them in a large room. Here at Schmidt, for example, they have an auditorium. Well, if I were getting serious about choosing between a couple or maybe three horns, I'd ask to use the auditorium, because in a big room like that, you can see what the sound is going to do in a performance situation. In a small room like this, you can tell how the horn responds, how well in tune it is, and things like that. But you really don't get an overall picture about the sound until you get to a larger room. So if you're testing an instrument, try to get to a large room. Otherwise, if you test or compare horns in a small room like this, you'll like the smaller horns almost every time. So a little tip for the day. It's been a long talk, but thanks for listening.